Gaius Julius Caesar. A name known to everyone despite their level of historical knowledge, and a name that my text-to-speech absolutely refuses to pronounce properly in classical Latin even if I write it phonetically. See. Listen. Gaius Julius Caesar. Close enough, I guess. Caesar was just as well known in classical times, even before his defeat of his rival Pompey, which crowned him as the first dictatorial emperor of Rome. Caesar was one of history's greatest generals, and his claim to fame as a military leader was the Gallic Wars, which lasted from 58 to 50 BCE. The most climactic battle of the Gallic Wars was the Battle of Alesia, which took place in 52 BCE and was the last major military engagement of the conflict between Rome and the Gauls. Rome had prematurely announced its victory over Gaul, which finally led to a true allegiance between the Gallic tribes, led by the Arverni tribe's king, Vercingetorix. Yet another name my text-to-speech refuses to properly pronounce, but this time I can't really blame it. Vercingetorix had led multiple assaults on unprotected Roman settlements across Gaul, killing thousands, until finally hauling up with his army of 80,000 in the protected hilltop town of Alesia. Alesia was not only protected by a giant wall surrounding the city, but was also protected by rivers on either side and gave the Gallic army the higher ground. Vercingetorix and his army were, of course, closely followed by Caesar and his much smaller army. Caesar knew he didn't have a chance trying to lead a head-on attack on a larger army with twice the infantry, especially when said army was behind a secure wall. Where any normal general might decide to retreat, await more soldiers, and come up with a plan, Caesar decided to do about the most Chad thing ever done in war. He opted to just build a wall of his own around the city, and just wait for the Gauls to either starve, come to the Romans, or both. In a move that you would expect to hear in a child's fantasy story, Caesar didn't just build a wall, but he built a belt of camouflaged pits to protect the wall. Then beyond the pits, he built 2 circles of 4.5-meter trenches around the city, one of which filled with water from the rivers on either side of the city, becoming a moat. Even beyond that, he built another 6-meter-wide trench circling the city, and added even more scattered camouflaged pits where soldiers would fall onto 2-meter-long spikes if they were unlucky enough to take the plunge. In other words, Caesar was not f***ing around. Despite all this, Vercingetorix still decided to send cavalry to battle Caesar's army, though each attempt was unsuccessful. This led Vercingetorix to send out a smaller cavalry by night to the surrounding Gallic cities, with the intent of amassing a larger army to fight Caesar from the rear. Caesar was informed of the plan, however, and decided to do what he'd been doing best during the siege. You guessed it, he built another f***ing wall between him and the incoming relief army, which according to Caesar's later account, numbered over 250,000 Gallic soldiers. Keep in mind, this number might be about as believable as Herodotus' account of the Battle of Marathon, but I digress. Walled in, Vercingetorix and his army had already burned through the small food supply within the city walls, and not only were his soldiers starving, but as were the citizens of the city. Vercingetorix opted to reconcile this by sending out about 3,000 citizens, mainly women and children, into the unknown in the hopes that they could make it past Caesar's wall and find their way to nearby towns. Unfortunately, Caesar's army would not let them through, and when they turned back to Alesia, Vercingetorix wouldn't let them back into the city, and opted to let them starve outside the city walls. Seriously, what a couple of Finally, the reinforcements arrived, camping close by in the hopes of spotting weaknesses in Caesar's defense. The relief forces attacked the fortification, and were soon joined by Gallic infantry from inside the wall. Caesar was being attacked from both directions by 2 much larger armies, but was able to hold off both attacks for the time being thanks to his fortification. The Gauls attacked again a day and a half later, this time by night. Once again, however, due to the superior leadership from Caesar, as well as his general Mark Antony, a man who would become a lifelong companion, this attack from the outside was as unsuccessful as the first, possibly because the relief army didn't have the aid from the soldiers inside the wall, as they used the distraction to attempt to fill up the trenches created by the Romans. The Gauls inside the walls retreated back into the city shortly after the retreat of their reinforcements. The reinforcement Gauls finally found the weakness they were looking for on the north side of a hill that prevented the Romans from building due to its steepness. 60,000 Gallic soldiers marched on the spot under cover of darkness, then attacked the weak point at noon. Seemingly coordinated, Vercingetorix ordered a simultaneous attack on any and all weak points on the inside of the wall. Caesar ordered his lieutenant Titus Labienus and his 6 cohorts of cavalry to defend the outer weak point of the wall. Caesar then sent Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, who years later would famously stick a knife in his back, and Caius Fabius, who years later would not, with a combined 13 cohorts of cavalry to defend the inner wall. This is when Caesar would join in the battle himself, hacking soldiers from his horse, spilling blood all over the Gallic soil, making the grass redder than his flowing cape that sternly flowed in the wind. Hey, again, this is Caesar's account of the story. Caesar led 4 cohorts of cavalry, some of which were ordered to follow him, and the rest were ordered to leave the fortification in order to attack the Gallic reinforcements from the rear. His soldiers laid down their javelins and drew their swords as the rear flanking army swarmed on the attacking Gauls, and Caesar's troops advanced faster than the Gauls could flee the battle. Even many of those fleeing were still slaughtered by the Roman soldiers, especially by the overly aggressive German soldiers serving under Caesar who pursued the Gauls attempting to flee. Vercingetorix realized the battle was over, as was likely the Gallic War as a whole. Vercingetorix agreed to surrender to the Romans, which he did in person to Caesar. The Romans took Vercingetorix, as well as their captives as trophies of the battle, but spared the Aedui and Arverni people in an attempt to win them over in order to prevent future Gallic uprisings under Roman rule. Vercingetorix would be imprisoned for 6 years, and would later be forced to march in a parade for Caesar in an act of humiliation. Fortunately for Vercingetorix, this was his only punishment from the Romans, who were known for punishing those who would attempt to uprise against them. Vercingetorix would live happily ever after. Just kidding, he was later strangled to death.